Okay, hello and welcome to another Gardener's Question Time. This one is a World Food Day special with me, Abby, Jenny and Susan. So I'll introduce myself first and then the others in Galloway. I run a small market garden and I have a large polytunnel, an outdoor growing space, and I work with a sandy loam soil that is very rocky. Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I live in northwest of Glasgow. We've got a small garden. It's terraced at the front, so it gets a lot of sun, and the soil is quite loamy with decent amount of clay in it.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I live in the south of Glasgow, and I have luckily a good-sized garden. It's pretty heavy clay soil, some silt, I'd say, and I also have an allotment at which the soil is really very similar.
Great. Okay, we've had a whole load of questions in our shout out for Questions for Gardeners Question Time across social media. So we're just going to go through them from the top. So starting with a question in from Fiona about fruit trees. This is fruit tree season, both pruning them, planting them and everything else. Fiona says, we would like to plant a new pear tree on our allotment. What varieties would you recommend for a location east of the central belt? And when is the best time to plant? Any other advice? Okay. Who wants to go first on this?
Well, first thing to mention is this book, which covers, so when you're talking about local growing, it covers a lot of the varieties and specific issues to Scotland, so it's worth having generally for gardening. And they've got a section on pears, and they recommend there's quite a lot of varieties. I think some of them might be quite rare, but probably more commonly available are things like Conference, Concord and Beth. So these, because some pears are not that good for eating, originally a lot of pears were grown for cooking, but these are all good eating ones. You want one that's like sweet, and it's going to be, because you don't want to go to all that trouble to grow pears and then not be that pleased with the fruit and not want to eat them.
Unless you want to bake them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of baking. And these are also recommended for general Scottish climates. They don't get into specific regions because it really depends on your microclimate of where you are, so what the allotment is like, how sheltered it is, because the pear also flowers earlier than the apple, so it's more susceptible to early frosts and things like that. So that's a thing to watch out for. But I like the sound of Beth because it also is compact and heavy cropping from a young age, it says.
Is it self-fertile?
That one, one is, yes.
Oh, okay.
Some of them, they say
Concord and Conference are both self-fertile as well.
Mm-hmm. Some of them, they say they're self-fertile, but also if there is cross-pollinating, it actually improves the yield in the fruit. So even the self-fertile ones can be better if you have more than one.
You have another friend for it.
Interesting.
So the top tips with pears would be to make sure that they've got lots of slow-release nitrogen to feed off. So when I've planted fruit trees in the past, I tried to put either some semi-rotted horse manure right at the bottom of the tree pit, or things like feathers can be really good. So if you've got any bust-up feather pillows or old duvets, then like taking all the sort of stuffing out of those and putting those at the bottom, and they're really good for slow release nitrogen. Also horsehair, which is less easily obtainable in old horsehair mattresses, because you don't really get old horsehair mattresses anymore, but it was also quite a favourite. And fish, putting a sort of a manky old fish at the bottom is another top tip for kind of fruit tree planting.
Also distracts anyone from stealing your pears, I guess. Like,
I don't think it's going to get absorbed into the flavour, in fairness.
I don't know. You might want to not go up to the tree even, like.
You might find
And when
to get up
you've had pears, Abby, when have you picked them? Because it says here they need to be picked before they ripen, then stored to ripen.
Oh, okay. They quite often are, because when you sort of buy shop bought pears, they're often quite hard, and they'll sort of soften up. Yeah, because when they're soft, they're kind of, your fingers can go right through them quite easily. So there's probably a fair point in that. I normally pick them at the same time as I pick all the apples, sort of into the end of September and early October kind of things. But yeah, it is all very site specific, as you said, Jenny. But wasn't there a nice anecdote there from somebody in Fife?
Oh, this book, it just sort of it's because she travelled. It's Caroline Beaton. She travelled around Scotland visiting people and finding out about how they garden. So she just mentions like, Beth is the best pear for David Catt in Jedburgh. So she just mentions that he grows it in Jedburgh. So if you're in that area, then
but we are talking about east of the Central Belt. That was where Fiona was. So
yeah,
I think that would be the sea, isn't it? I don't know.
Well, I happen to know her because she's my mum, and she's actually in West Lothian. She's actually in West Lothian, so it's not that far east.
Not too far from Jedburgh either, really. So Beth,
yeah, same general.
And the best time to plant, well, the best time to plant a fruit tree was 20 years ago, but failing that,
today,
between October and March. So today,
yeah,
off you go, plant a fruit tree today. Okay, sticking on the theme of fruits, Susan, do you want to read this one out?
Yeah, so this is a question from my friend Juliet. Now, Juliet moved into a house with a massive garden in Edinburgh a couple of years ago, and she's inherited very luckily, some mature established apple trees. There's some cooking and there's some eating. Slightly strangely, however, the trees have been surrounded by plastic sheeting, and on top of that, gravel has been laid. I assume it's been a maintenance thing, because the old lady who lived in the house before probably didn't want to be bothered with too much gardening, I'm guessing. So Juliet's question is basically, they've had 2 good crops off the apples since they moved in, but they obviously have been deprived of nutrients. What should they do, basically? So that's the question. So I've never come across a situation before, so I kind of did a bit of like digging, and obviously they're going to remove the gravel and the plastic sheeting. But I suppose there's a couple of considerations, right? Apparently, apple trees are one of the hardiest kind of fruit trees. They will grow in most conditions as long as they have enough root depth, which I'm guessing these do because they're established trees, and as long as they are neither too dry nor too waterlogged. So I suppose that leads on to, probably would need some more information to give a better answer. The plastic sheeting may have been stopping the soil from getting waterlogged because it's been preventing water running into the soil, or it may have been maintaining moisture. So, and that might depend on what the soil type is. So, for example, if you've got a heavy clay soil, putting plastic sheeting over it may actually mean that it's not getting too waterlogged. But if you've got a very sandy soil, particularly if it's a slope, you might be getting water running in from the side and then not evaporating because of the plastic sheeting. So I think you'd want to know what your soil is and what the situation is before you decide what action to take. But I would recommend 1 or 2 things. If you think that the soil is likely to get waterlogged, I would take the sheeting off nonetheless, and I would plant a green manure crop around it, because that would drink up some of the excess water, if there in fact is excess water, and then it could be dug in to put more nutrients back into the soil. You could do beans or something. You might even be able to climb beans up the trees potentially, like, you know, like forest gardening style. But if the soil appears like maybe it doesn't retain moisture very well, I would layer up organic matter, basically, like manure, well-rotted manure, for example. And that should kind of enrich the soil as well. So, you might want to do a combination of the two, depending on what you think the conditions are. I don't know, that would be my approach, basically. And you want to check you've got like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You would get a lot of that from green crops and from manure. You could also do like blood and bone mix on the soil. I don't know if anyone else has got any kind of thoughts about this.
Yeah, top tips. I don't know. My initial thought was that if you're getting good crops off it, and the trees seem happy and healthy, then if it's not broke, don't fix it. But if it's you know, if you're talking about more an aesthetic thing, and you want the gravel and the plastic gone, then exactly what Susan has said. It all depends on what you find underneath, really.
Yeah.
And how compact the soil already is, you know, what kind of soil it is, and what you're working with. My main concern around keeping the plastic and the gravel would be around kind of feeding the tree, making sure it's got enough nutrients for its future cropping. But the question is that Juliet said that they were mature, healthy trees.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that would lead me to kind of assume that the membrane is permeable and that there are nutrients getting in there, but we haven't got that information, so not entirely sure. But yeah, exactly what Susan has said. If you want to remove the plastic and the gravel, the sheets and the gravel, then the thing to do is to be ready with kind of all sorts of different things. And whether it's a free draining soil or a clayey soil. Actually, adding organic matter is never going to do any harm. It's only going to do good. So getting plenty of kind of well rotted manure in and around the tree at that point. Yeah, can't go wrong.
Yeah, sounds about right to me.
Jenny, anything to add, or should we move on?
No, let's move on.
Great stuff.
So Scott says, how best to keep coriander alive on a windowsill in a small pot? Temperature, direct sun, soil moisture, rate of watering. So I don't know whether it's like a plant from a supermarket or if you've tried to grow seeds in a pot. If it's a plant from a supermarket, it's probably not going to live very long anyway, because they're sort of
forced on, aren't they?
Yeah, forced and overcrowded in their pots. But yeah, if you grow it from seed, you can get quite good crop and like quite strong little plants. And they just make sure they don't get too wet. So they need lots of holes in the bottom of the pot. It's always going to be a bit more tricky to grow in a pot on a windowsill than outside in a garden, because you've got to control all the variables yourself. And you need to provide them with enough sunlight. So they need at least 6 hours sun, which can be hard to get depending on your windowsill.
This time of year.
Yeah, and if it is sometimes windowsills get very hot as well, so it can dry out really quickly. So it's just watching all those variables. Don't overwater. Just water when the soil feels kind of dry, or dry to like the depth of a couple of centimeters.
I normally go up to the sort of my first knuckle on your finger.
Mm-hmm.
If it's dry there, then it needs a bit of water. But if it's not, it's all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coriander is obviously a plant originating from elsewhere in the world where it's hotter and sunnier, so it is much more tolerant of dryness, but it does need extra sunlight. About 6 hours sunlight, as you said, Jenny, and it's hard to kind of maintain that on a Scottish windowsill in summer, in winter. So.
And the thing with coriander is, as well as if you're growing it for the leaves, it's not got a long life really, because it will try to bolt and produce seeds quite quickly. So you just have to do continual sowings in different pots if you want.
It has got a short lifespan, hasn't it? I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. People ask about keeping herbs alive, and it's like, well, it's not
Some
going
of
to stay
them,
like it's
yeah,
got a
some of them
lifespan,
aren't.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Like the animals, like coriander and basil, they've got a short lifespan.
Yeah.
That's that.
Would you ever try, like, sad lamps, the ones that
Mhm.
give people more daylight
A
effectively?
grow lamp,
What
yeah.
about that for plants? I've never
That
tried
would
it,
be,
but
so-
I wonder if it would. Probably
Should
would
do.
if you did it enough, wouldn't it?
especially, yeah, if you give microgreens a try as well, they're meant to do really well under a grow lamp.
Okay.
And
yeah.
again,
Just LED lights will be fine.
mm,
It
Yeah.
doesn't need to be any special sad lamp lighting or anything marketed
Yeah.
like that. And LED spotlights. It's as if you grow it in a cupboard. You didn't have anything to do with the windowsill or anything like that. You can
Yeah.
just have herbs growing in a cupboard, and you have you just remember to switch your lights on and off at certain times. of the day.
Yeah, to mimic however many hours.
Or
it
if-
is.
or if your windowsill isn't getting enough sun, you can use them on the windowsill too.
Mm.
So that kind of brings us on to the next herby question, which is about the flavor of herbs. So Lorna says, I've heard that with herbs, if you treat them mean, keep them keen, they taste better. Is this true? And how do you do it on a windowsill?
So again, we're not sure whether she's talking about annuals or perennials here. So if it was annuals, we'll kind of cover that with coriander, and it's a similar kind of story with basil. But if she's talking about things like oregano and thyme and stuff like that,
Rosemary.
which that'd be tricky to grow on a windowsill indoors, outdoors. Hang on, what's the question again?
I think she means indoors.
Windowsill implies out. No, you're probably right.
A window box outdoors would be better.
Well, let's answer it. Let's answer both questions, both variables in that. If it was indoors, it's the same kind of rules apply. Really, you want to make sure it's not too waterlogged, not too wet. Again, most of these like Mediterranean style herbs have come from hotter climates, and so there's a reason for not keeping them too waterlogged, and cutting them back on a regular basis. So actually using the herbs.
Them, but not more than a third of the whole plant.
That's the general rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the treat them mean. Sorry, Susan.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I with basil, I have recently, maybe everyone else has been doing this the whole time, but I only recently started doing this, of like taking out the top of the shoots and then finding that it branches more, which I suppose you could say is maybe a bit mean, taking off I used to always take the bottom leaves off because they were the oldest ones, but I've actually started now taking the top off, and then it seems to produce more.
For sure.
I do take the bottom ones off as well before they are useless, but yeah. So I guess that goes along with. It's almost like pruning.
That's how you're meant to harvest basil.
Oh, is it? Okay. I didn't actually know that, but but it's working better, definitely. Yeah.
And it will keep going for longer in that way as well.
So the treat them mean, keep them keen thing, I think, is about them. If they get a little bit stressed, like if they particularly they don't need a lot of feeding or anything like that, because they're not used to growing in fertile fields. They're sort of generally descended from wild plants as well. Even mint, it like grows in the wild in Britain, so they don't need like really fertilized soils. And also if they're a little bit stressed, like if they don't get enough water, then they put more energy into producing their alkaloids in their leaves, which are what they use to defend themselves against predators and things. But we like the taste of it, so we want more of it. So I think that's where the like making them a little bit stressed can improve the flavor.
You think they'd evolve so that to understand that, wouldn't you? At some point, so hang on a minute. I'll make predators humans, and they seem to be eating more of us. Those alkaloids. Honestly.
But then we're also sowing more of them as well. So maybe they're one step ahead of the game. That might be it.
Intelligent plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would the same happen with chilies? Do chilies get stronger if you don't water them so much?
We'd have to do a scientific
Yeah, no,
experiment. I
yeah, we'll
think
have to test it out.
that
Yeah.
could be a good
Test.
video.
That's not one of the questions.
No, sorry.
Okay, the next question we've got in here is from Catherine Tinder. And Catherine says, my runner beans didn't do well this year. They produced flowers, but the flowers seemed to just drop off without creating beans. Couldn't see any obvious pests, though slugs and snails munched at what few beans there were. Could it have been the lack of pollination or soil and weather conditions that caused the flowers to drop off? The plants were dwarf varieties. So I've got a story on this. So I sowed a load of runner beans in the polytunnel, not a dwarf variety, but I don't think that makes a huge amount of difference, to be honest. They established, they did really well. They were looking amazing and big and viney and beautiful and covered in flowers. And they weren't producing any beans. The flowers were just falling off. So the only reason I could think of was pollination issues. I did a little bit of research, and indeed, peas are self-pollinating and self-fertile. French beans, self-pollinating and self-fertile. Runner beans do require insect pollination or hand pollination. So I looked at a few YouTube videos, and I kind of like looking at how to potentially hand pollinate and looking at all the runner bean flowers and thinking there's actually hundreds of them. I'm not going to get around all of those. So what I did instead was I tracked some bumblebees, and it's the short-tailed bumblebees with a sort of yellow bum, which are the best ones, but any of them will do it. A short-tongued bumblebee, sorry. I went around with a jar. And I kidnapped bumblebees and I took them into the polytunnel and I said, here are things to eat. And they were quite confused for the first few minutes, and then they were like, oh yeah, look, there's loads of things to eat. And then they went out, and then they brought their friends back. And I did have many runner beans for weeks.
So you trained the bees. That's amazing.
Hooray.
So it's all about the short-tongued bumblebees. So
it might go.
They just sometimes they just, if they were growing outside, sometimes they just can't find them. They just fly by.
Maybe so. So I think Catherine is probably growing outside. So this was in the polytunnel, so it's a protected environment, and I can understand why the bees might have not found them so easily. My outdoor crop of runner beans they did find, and they were fine with pollination. But I guess my advice would be to plant other short-tongued bumblebee attracting plants, such as Phacelia, around the plants. Cornflower is pretty good. Yarrow's quite good. So yeah, other flowers. So the bees kind of go, ooh, look at that, and then they'll go, oh, and while I'm here, I'll have a bit of that at the same time. So especially Phacelia.
Okay.
Everyone should plant Phacelia anyway because it's the most beautiful flower in the world. So.
I think that's a pretty good comprehensive answer.
Yeah. Anything to add, or should we move on?
The only other thing I would possibly add, and this may not have been the case at all, but on 2 occasions this year, my beans got kind of wrecked by winds. Now, I mean, this wouldn't specifically affect the flowers, but it could nonetheless have knocked flowers off. Like it happened, there was very strong winds just after I planted my initial crop of beans out, and it damaged them loads, although they did recover. And then later in the year, when they were flowering, there was another spate of strong winds, and it actually, like, I had them, they were, climbing up canes and whatnot, and it snapped a load of the growing stalks, so it just, like, there was all this growth and it was snapped off. It's absolutely wrecked. But so that wasn't specific damage to the flowers, but nonetheless, I'm sure that also did damage and knock off a lot of my flowers at the same time. But
and your garden's quite sheltered as well, isn't it?
Exactly, I know, that was the thing. Yeah, the first lot, actually, that was when I was down in Liverpool. The first lot, when they got planted out, that was actually down in Liverpool, and that's not sheltered. That's very, very windy. But up here, the second time it happened was in Glasgow, and as you said, yeah, it's generally a very calm, tranquil garden, but it wrecked them. I don't really think there's anything I could have. I don't know. I mean, like, I wouldn't normally put in wind protection.
Wind protection, yeah, that's the only thing.
unnecessary the vast majority of the time. It was just unlucky that there was a couple of days that wrecked it. But
yeah.
anyway.
There were some pretty high winds right in the middle of the season this year, I think.
Yeah.
That can always wreck your beans.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on then. We've got a question from Amy Quinn. Susan, do you want to read this one?
Yeah. My pumpkins were looking great on Monday morning, but by the evening, the leaves had all turned brown and wilted. 2 okay-sized pumpkins on it, but the rest could do with a wee bit to grow. Never grown pumpkins before, and they were looking fab, then a dramatic demise. This also has courgettes.
We did actually answer this on the Facebook because it was important to let her know immediately what to do. But just in general, and I'm sure this happened to everybody this year, we had an early frost. It was on the 22nd of September. That's when it was, and that was my question to her on the social media was, did you get a frost on Sunday night? And she was like, yes, but it was really sunny on Monday. It's like, doesn't matter.
Yeah,
doesn't matter. So some plants, so your beans, courgettes, nasturtiums. There's probably others that I can't think of right now. Basil. Anyway, others. All really susceptible to frost. They really don't like it. Delicate things. Yeah, peas as well. Yeah. So yeah, quite vulnerable, quite delicate. Definitely not going to last. So the only thing you can do at that point is to gather in the squashes that are remaining and make sure they're stored somewhere sensible so that you can carry it.
Yeah, because they will store well, won't they?
They will store well, but if they've got frosted as well, then they go mushy, really quickly. So you've got a very short window. It's too late now because I imagine everybody all over Scotland's had a frost by now. We have down here in Galloway. We're quite high up and exposed, but nonetheless.
Yeah, after that frost, I was just like, because I work in a garden as well in the south side, a school garden that's got a number of raised beds, and after that I thought, I better just bring everything in now.
But it's been really nice since then.
Yeah.
Courgettes.
It was unexpected. Like you wouldn't, you would never have thought to go and put anything on them then because it was lovely weather. But
they've got there's a big shipping container. So I put everything in shelves in there because it's cool and dark, and so I think it's going to keep quite well in there. There's potatoes, pumpkins, courgettes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Storing away nicely. That's what you need.
And any pumpkins that had frost damage, would you recommend just cooking them straight away? And you could always use them or then freeze portions or whatever. Because Yeah.
So straight into chutney. That's my.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Okay, what's next? We've got a couple of questions about.
Shall I do this one? So Rachel Kelly.
This one and the next question.
They're
quite related.
Kind of combined. Yeah. Rachel Kelly says, does garlic planted in October need a cloche to protect it from the frost? And Mary Patterson says, what are your recommendations for autumn planted alliums, garlic, onions and shallots? Varieties and planting tips, please.
Okay. So the answer to the first question is no.
It does not need a cloche because it needs the cold snap. That's why we plant
They're very
garlic.
frosty. They don't care.
We actually plant garlic in the autumn so that it does get that cold temperatures over winter before growing in the spring.
That's the only way to get it to clove, I think, isn't it? Am I right? Like, because I've planted garlic at other times of the year and it will grow and it sort of gets bigger, but I've just ended up, when I've just randomly stuck cloves in, I've just ended up with like one expanding clove, if you see what I mean. Whereas I believe that it's the cold snap that makes them develop other cloves. Am I right? Maybe I'm not right. Hopefully I am.
I don't know.
I don't think specifically, no.
Is it not?
It might be. I think I'm going to park that one. But
yeah.
You could,
okay. Yeah.
But obviously, they're doing most of their growing and developing into other cloves over sort of between kind of spring and into June, July anyway. So,
okay, maybe that's
but just to get them
But maybe
going in the first place, they do like a bit of cold.
yeah.
So when you plant your garlic, you should make a hole that is deep enough so that there's about 2 centimeters above the tip of the clove. I have worked with volunteers and in community growing spaces who, I don't know how or why, but anyway, people often plant them upside down.
Oh no.
So you must remember it's flat bit at the bottom and pointy bit on at the
I can see if it's starting to shoot, you might think that was the root. I can see how you might do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but even when it's not starting to shoot, it's put them in upside down. So pointy bit up the ways and about 2 centimeters of soil above that. They do like a well-fed ground, but like, and not too waterlogged either, obviously because they're a sort of root type vegetable. Onto varieties. Did you have any particular varieties, you guys, to recommend?
I've never planted, other than garlic, I've never planted alliums in the autumn. And this is too late for advice for right now, but for next year. I did, however, do an experimental sowing of onion seeds in the second half of August. I can't remember the name of the variety actually, but I think there's a few varieties you could use this for. And yeah, the idea is that you plant them in the August, they set off now, and then you get bigger ones a bit earlier next year. So I've never done this before, but I've tried that in August. As I said, obviously too late for now, but for something to think about for next year. I've never planted any other alliums in the autumn though.
Yep, I have planted onion sets quite often, and I know I usually just stick with the regular varieties like Ailsa Craig. Which is a good Scottish variety. The reason it's called Ailsa Craig is because it's developed here in Scotland, and it's so it's well adapted to our climate and should be supported because you can get kind of heritage varieties. So we should be growing stuff that is kind of endemic to Scotland and developed up here. And I love garlic. I honestly, guys, love garlic. I eat like a bulb of garlic a day pretty much. Not a clove, a bulb. Easily. So I can grow loads of garlic. There's 2 different strains of garlic. There's a hardneck variety and a softneck variety. Because again, we're talking about a Mediterranean vegetable here, the hardneck variety is a little bit more resilient to kind of poorer, wetter weathers of the north. So yeah, I kind of did a little bit of digging and thinking about varieties. And there's one, what's it called again? Hang on a second. The Albigensian White, which is a soft neck variety, but it's from southwest France. And again, that is a pretty good heavy cropper. There were also, where have they gone? I've been sort of doing a bit of research. Yeah, the Iberian White is also quite a healthy and reliable cropper. Large fat white ones, but probably the best one and the most available one is the early purple white, and that's a variety that's going to come out in the middle of June. It's got that very kind of familiar purple skin to it, and I believe it is a hardneck variety. So those would be my top 3 recommendations. And there's a website that I stumbled across actually, which is called thegarlicfarm.co.uk. So that seems to be, because the regular sort of seed stockers like Real Seeds and Seed Cooperative actually don't sell garlic bulbs.
Yeah.
So yeah, because it's quite a specialist thing to develop and to grow. For seed varieties. So yeah, and it can be quite expensive to buy it as well. So yeah, go for thegarlicfarm.co.uk. That seems to be pretty good, but also you can get them directly through RHS, or you can get them through places like Sutton's or Mr. Fotheringill's. But yeah, I've never come across the Garlic Farm before.
Or a cheapy option, which I did, was just get an organic bulb of garlic from my veg box, and actually, because I hadn't ordered any, I'd forgotten to order any in, so I was just like, I'll just chop these in the ground, and it worked really well.
And it was fine.
Yeah.
So that's from an organic veg box from the UK, from like a
to be clear, separate out the cloves before you plant them if you're doing that, right? Not just the whole bulb.
Yeah, and each of those cloves should grow into a whole new bulb. Yeah. No,
like magic.
I haven't actually got my garlic in yet, which is cutting it a bit fine. You can, if you miss this window, you can plant it in early spring. It's that is also okay. It won't make a huge amount of difference, to be honest. It's just that it's quite nice to get it in the ground now, because it's one of the few things that you can get in the ground now.
I mean, I really like garlic, but maybe I don't quite eat as much as Abby does. But when I find that I've had cloves that have gone a bit shriveled, I just stick them in the ground, because I tend to find that they plump up again, and then at least you get maybe like a double-sized clove. That's what like just purely I just put them in between other plants. Like, I know that's not like the official method for growing garlic, but if it's gone to a point, not if it's moldy, clearly I wouldn't do that, but if it's just shriveled, that's what I do.
Well, they'll still grow tips anyway, and you can still cut those and still use them. You can still use those as cooking. It's like garlic shoots, they're really tasty. Green garlics. Okay, so that brings us fairly neatly on to the next question, which is also about what we can sow and grow this time of year. And it's from Juliet Robinson. I think that's our second question from Juliet, I think.
Yeah.
So she says, what can I still sow this year? What should be under cover? What can be left exposed? And what is best in terms of cover if you don't have a full-scale polytunnel? So we've covered the garlic and onions kind of side of things. Other recommendations?
So I went really into the kind of the later autumn growing last year for the first time, and I was really pleased. As I said, I've only done it really the 1 year, so it could have been fluke, but it did work. And what I did was I purchased off the internet a couple of mini polytunnels. They are about 3 foot high, and they're about maybe like 6 foot long, but you can get them in different sizes. I got sort of like the biggest of the mini ones, if you get what I mean, just so that I had more height for the crops to grow under. They weren't especially expensive. I think maybe they were like £20 each, but you could also, if you really wanted to, construct your own with like plastic sheeting and wire and make hoops if you wanted to, and that probably would be cheaper. Mine came with like a sort of pole frame, and you just slot them together. I honestly would highly recommend them. The one thing I would say is they did get damaged a bit in the wind, and I was trying to sort of wedge them around the edges of my raised beds, which didn't work very well. And I think this year I'm going to peg them down. In fact, I intended to have already done all of this by this point this year, but I haven't got around to it. But anyway, so what I put in it last year that worked was I tried spinach. I didn't really have any luck with the spinach, I have to say. But I then also did grow land cress. It's a type of cress, surprisingly enough. Various different oriental mustards. So you can use these for salad if you're okay with quite strong mustardy salad leaves, or you can cook them, and they go much milder when you cook them. So like Mizuna, there's lots of things called like Green Wave. If you just look up oriental mustards, you will find loads of them. And I guess these have evolved loads and loads. Yeah, oriental mustards. I guess they've evolved in like colder parts of China and Asia, and obviously therefore they're cold resistant. And I had great success with them. I even had quite a lot of success with some of them that weren't under the cloche. What else did I have? I had kale, which I managed to grow small leaves from. They didn't grow to full-scale plants. Maybe they would have had I left them enough, but they were, you could just pick leaves off like a cut and come again crop. What else? Claytonia, lamb's lettuce, or what's the other word for lamb's lettuce? Is it winter purslane? Winter purslane. Is that something different? I'm getting mixed up. But I think, do you know what? I think Claytonia is also called winter purslane, I think. But lamb's lettuce, corn salad. That's the word I'm trying to
Lawn
come up
salads,
with.
yeah.
That's the other name for lamb lettuce. Yeah, and they all work. I've also this year I also put broad beans under the poly and grew the broad beans up to a certain height under the polytunnel, took the plot off in the spring. That worked. This year I'm also going to try something called Saitai, and it's another oriental brassica. Saitai, Tsaitai. So obviously mustards are brassicas. This is also a brassica, and it's also an oriental one. But this one grows more like a sprouting broccoli. And apparently you can plant it, theoretically, even outside up to November. I don't know whether that is dependent, whether you could manage that in Scotland, but in the UK, they say you can. So I'm going to try it under cover and see how it goes. Round and smooth peas as well.
I would suggest that we can't. That we can grow stuff outdoors in Scotland in winter, but it's going to be a lot slower. Because the simple fact is that biological activity slows right down the colder and colder it gets, and it stops pretty much at 4 degrees. So once you get down to 4 degrees, and it's definitely drops below that at night, and quite often then it will do during the day, later in the year as well, then you're not going to see very much in the way of growth whatsoever. I'm lucky. I've got a big kind of 10 metre by 6 metre polytunnel, which is full. It's absolutely full at the moment. It's full of salads, it's full of kales, it's full of Welsh rocket, and Mizuna and chards, all different types of chards, all the better packs. But they are pretty much mostly seeds that I sowed back in sort of early September. So by the time I'd cleared all the beans and whatnot out, I was ready to plant out these small plants. But having said that, I am also still sowing things like flashy butter oak, which is a hardy lettuce variety, and corn salads, and more Mizuna. I'm sowing those in trays in the polytunnel, so that by the time the other crops, which will have a limited life cycle as all crops do, well, by the time they're done, I've got these seedlings that are ready to plant out into the beds. But yeah, I would. I've got some chard outside. I've got some kale outside as well. But just the rate of growth, it's chalk and cheese. It's two opposite ends of the scale. It's definitely worth investing in some sort of cover for if you want to keep things going over winter. I would say so.
You mentioned the hardy lettuce. I've also got something that I'm going to try this year is winter lettuces. Now I found one called Reine de la Glace, which I'm probably massacring the pronunciation of, but it's Ice Queen, and it's apparently was bred in the French Pyrenees, and so it's used to, so it's from cold climates as well, so I don't know. I mean, it might not work, but I had intended to get these seeds in earlier, but I did it in October last year, and I'm going to do it again. And if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, and like I said earlier on, when we were chatting through these questions, like the only mistake you can make is not trying it all.
Yeah, exactly. And if it doesn't work how you've done it this year, do it differently next year. It's
learning. It's all about learning.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just mindful that we've got 15 minutes left of recording time, and we've got I think 2 questions to get through. So who have we got next?
Can I read you Carrie's question, because I really enjoy the wording?
Yeah, it is quite funny.
Is soil pH actually something that impacts basic veg propagation, or is it just for fancy people who like faffing about and making gardening appear more difficult than it is? And do I really have to send soil samples away to be tested for pH, or is there an easier way?
Okay.
I enjoyed this question.
I enjoyed the wording of this question as well. I have an anecdote that can explain why it's important. But maybe somebody else wants to go first.
Not me, because I am very lazy and don't test the pH of my soil. So I'm not going to give you any good answers to this.
Do you want to hear my anecdote?
It depends on your philosophy. Like some gardeners, some more natural gardeners will just sort of say, well, what grows.
Yeah.
and everything sort of balances itself out. But
then if you've made beds, then making sure that you've got the right stuff in it is kind of, we have to look after the soil. The soil is the basis of our garden. It is the building block. It is the core of it. So, soil health is really important, and part of that is pH. Part of it is organic matter and nutrients and carbon sequestration and all the rest of it. But if we look after the soil will look after the plants, and we're almost guaranteed good crops if you've got good soil. So it is so important, so important. And my anecdote relates to a project I was doing with North Kelvin Meadow a couple of years ago, and they had volunteers and quite a few new growers, and they needed a bit of upskilling and a bit of support. So as Propagate does quite often, went in and ran maybe, I kind of think we did 8 weeks of growing workshops with them. And one of the beds in particular was really rubbish. Like it was the plants were germinating, they were getting to about this high, and then they were just not doing anything else. So we tested the pH, and it is easy to test the pH. You just Google pH testing kit and buy one. There's various different forms. I really like the ones that you put into a little test tube, and you add the fluid in, you give it a shake, and then you leave it for a few minutes, and it kind of settles out into different colours. But you can see whether it kind of goes from basically green to sort of brownish red sort of thing on a scale, and you can check that against the thing in the book, and it'll tell you whether it's where you are on the scale of kind of like alkalinity to acidity. Anyway, we tried that on the beds in North Kelvin Meadow, this particular bed, and it was like super acidic. Right, okay, that's your problem. So we dug a little bit deeper, and it's just like, well, it's mostly made out of wood chip. So that's another part of the problem. So wood chip is also really carbon heavy and will inhibit nitrogen uptake. So that's the other thing. But super acidic plus heavy carbon. You're just like, okay. So we needed to kind of basically get all the soil that wasn't really soil out of there, buy in topsoil and some well-rotted horse manure, and mix that all up together. And then obviously did a retest of pH. Okay, we're at neutral. Got some crops in there, and the following season it was like lots of amazing vegetables. So yeah, it does matter. Yes, it matters.
Yeah. Okay. And it depends what you're growing, what pH they want as well, doesn't it? So just very, very briefly, but things like aubergines, chicory, potatoes, rhubarb, they actually quite like acidic, don't they? But things like brassicas will be happier if it's closer to neutral or completely neutral. Yeah. Can I just quickly tell you how a way I found out for testing the pH that I think will appeal to Carrie, knowing Carrie, is that you can get 2 cups of soil, and in 1 cup of soil, you would pour in half a cup of vinegar. And if nothing happens, then either your soil is acidic or it's neutral. If your soil starts to fizz, then it's alkaline because it's reacting to the vinegar and reacting to the acid in the vinegar. And in the other one, you would mix up baking soda and water, about half a cup of baking soda and distilled water, because I think the pH of water isn't actually always neutral, but distilled water. And then pour that into the other one. And if that fizzes, then your soil is acidic. And if it doesn't, it's neutral or alkaline. So there you go. No.
Have you tried it?
One of my sisters-in-law did it with her daughter and videoed it, and I saw the results, and it did actually work. So yeah. So I've
tried it, and it worked. But obviously, quite crude. You don't get any sort of idea of how much, but yeah, it did.
Yeah. So something fun you can do with kids, at least, anyway.
Sounds like great fun.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got one final question. I think it's Jenny's turn to read it out.
Yeah, this is about for the coffee drinkers and the tea drinkers. Carrie again says, I throw my coffee grounds and tea leaves directly into the soil, thinking, easy compost and aeration. Am I helping, hindering, or just doing nothing except making myself feel better by pretending to attend to soil richness and future veg growth?
A comedian, this Carrie, isn't she? another beautifully phrased question.
Yes.
Personally, I would always.
What do you do, guys?
I would always compost them first. Personally, I think for putting raw organic matter that hasn't broken down at all directly onto your beds. I mean, coffee can be quite acidic. You know, it's good. It's good to make sure it's been through a process first and it's turned into compost. That's my preference. Other people might beg to differ.
That's also what I do. I put pretty much everything into the compost heap. As saying earlier, the only thing I don't put into the compost heap is eggshells, but that's to kind of reduce slug damage. I just can't scatter that. But yeah, I would definitely put it in the compost heap first. Having said that, I did a little bit of digging. What I was going to say is that apparently when coffee grounds have been made, you know, when they've been used, most of the acidity is apparently leached out. So if you wanted to put used coffee grounds on the soil, you can. But I agree with Abby, though. I wouldn't personally. I would put it into the compost. But I guess you could. Though going back to the pH question, if you want to make your soil more acidic, then you could scatter fresh coffee on it because that would make it more acidic.
Apparently.
Yeah. Sorry, Jenny, I interrupted Jenny.
Yeah, coffee grounds. They won't actually. They don't have any. They're not going to make the soil more acidic. Yeah, once they've been used to make
apparently,
coffee. So they used coffee grounds. Yeah. So
although I think it is still quite acidic, but it's fresh coffee grounds that have not had the acidity leached out of them into the coffee that are most acidic, apparently. But yeah, from
what I gather, so there's definitely like controversy around this. So like some people like say it's brilliant, and other people like never do it. I think some of the issues, if you're digging in sort of raw, as you say, raw undecomposed stuff and putting it in the soil, then it actually takes nutrients away from the plant, because then all the little organisms are trying to break down the coffee grounds rather than help the plant. So it sort of diverts. So like you were saying with the wood chip, so it takes nitrogen out of the soil because it's actually sucking the nitrogen in to break it down. So it's not going to help the soil because it's not broken down enough. But I have heard that if it's on the top as like a mulch, then it's more of a slow process, so the worms can come up and bring the coffee down into the soil, or the wood chip breaks down, and the weather will do its thing to break it down over time, and that can actually help. So I would use it in moderation as a mulch on the top. Also use eggshells on the top, because I think, again, it may be more of a belief, but I think it keeps the slugs away from my plants. So putting in broken eggshells.
Yeah, talking about mulches. So where I grew up, it's pure sand soil. I mean, it's very close to the coast, and it drains instantly, kind of thing. My mum always used to put whole tea bags around the base of plants that she was trying to protect, because it's like this neat little mulch, and it actually did help maintain moisture in the soil. Having said that, there's been a lot of stuff recently on like social media and things about plastic content of the tea bags. Now, I don't know if when I was a child they didn't contain plastic, or whether it was just that we just ignored the fact that there were tea bags left. I actually don't remember that part of the story, but it did work as a mulch, and I break most of my tea bags open now. There's a few makes of tea bags that are safe to put directly whole into your compost, but to be on the safe side, I would just break them and like put the tea leaves into your compost. Or better yet, don't use tea bags, use loose tea leaves, because then you're not creating the waste of a tea bag.
That's it.
Yeah. So as long as you're not, as long as they're not going to go moldy on the top, which means like don't make it too thick a layer, and as long as it's not going to attract sort of rats or whatever, rodents, then I would say it's has a benefit of a mulch as well, which is stopping it too much moisture evaporating out of the soil. And in terms of getting getting nutrients into the soil, things that we eat. So like we eat bananas because they got potassium and trace minerals and magnesium and things like that. So I was like, well, let's start feeding my plants these things because they have the trace minerals in them. So I made a big concoction with that stewed for a while, but it had banana peels in it for the potassium, Epsom salts for the magnesium, bit of whey in there for like nitrogen, and just all thinking. I like thinking about the different minerals and putting it all in there, and then grass clippings and things like that, and then it just
With
drained
water
it all.
to make a tea.
Yes, but water to make a tea, and yeah, then just made a tea and poured it on the plants. I don't know if it.
Did you use it again? Did you use it consistently through the season?
Well, until it was run out.
Yeah, until we didn't make any more. Then I did one yesterday of comfrey, seaweed, and willow leaves, which I haven't really used the first
don't they? I don't know.
Growth.
Yeah.
They promote growth, so I've just been using that as a kind of, I made a tea out of that.
The willow can be good for rooting powder, can't it? Help propagating
I've been taking
cuttings.
quite a lot of cuttings lately of sage and rosemary, so yeah, I feel a bit of kind of intense willow tea will probably help that process. Yeah. But it's in terms of soil health generally, to carry in everybody, this is the time of year for mulching and for adding organic matter to your soil. I think more and more we're advocating a no-dig kind of methods, because digging will release carbon into the atmosphere. So as much as possible, you're just mulching on top, and the best stuff to get is really well rotted manure, or well broken down seaweeds, that kind of thing. Covering up bare soil.
Or if you can't get those, like layers of newspaper with wetted down so it doesn't blow away, grass clippings on the top, or leaves, autumn leaves, because then you cover the soil. As you say, you're not letting those nutrients evaporate off through the winter. You're not exposing it to the cold over winter.
Going back very specifically to coffee and tea, just for one moment though, coffee is a good source of potassium apparently, and tea leaves are a good source of nitrogen. So there you go. So drink lots of tea and coffee.
Especially coffee. All right. So that's all the questions. Have we got any final top tips from all of us for? Well, I just did mine on soil health and mulching. Other top tips to finish us off?
Yeah. Given that it looks like we're not going to be allowed to socialise indoors, try and, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, try and set up a nice little bench, social area outdoors, get a fire pit, and then you'll use the garden more too as well, and you'll actually be able to see people.
Yeah, like that.
Yes, that is on my list. A fire pit, definitely. Get outside.
I bought like this big corner bench that has a roof, and I haven't built it.
Oh, that's what you want. A bit of cover, a bit of fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, get your thermals on.
Yep, don't get the SADs. Just get out there and get all the daylight and all the sunlight, and roast some apple. Make toffee apples or something.
Yeah.
Nice.
Just you can be cozy outdoors.
Yeah, that's it. All right, well that's all from us. Thank you for tuning in for the Gardener's Question Time World Food Day special, pre-recorded edition. If you've got any follow-up questions, please just post them on our Facebook, or email us at hello@propagates.org.uk. Have a look at our website, loads more resources on there, and absolutely tons of videos now on our YouTube channel. Loads of them, mostly featuring.
And give us some love. Give us lots of likes.
Lots of likes, lots of shares, and if you've got any money at all, donations are always helpful. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.